consent, because if you don't have any questions, then staff that might be here for those items will not be asked to stay for the regular session.
So consent is which we have not previously had at all.
And we do have a space on the work session to discuss it.
Okay. Professional service.
5 minutes, just to answer any questions.
All right, so do you,
I'm going to ask if you intend to have questions or pull it off the agenda, to let me know now.
all right, so council, any discussion requested on those items?
Great. Sure.
Turn that on.
Do we turn this on now or no?
Yeah, when it's green.
That the code that was quoted in the packet said that the mayor would appoint a judge pro tem.
Mayor and council.
What was that?
Well, the way the charter reads is that you recommend and council approves.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
Yes, that's an important
What you
clarification.
were saying.
That's what we meant. We just didn't articulate it very well.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, and so we'll have a pool of people that we can draw from, and do we appoint ahead of time or at the time of need?
We appoint, what you would basically be approving is that we would have a pool of judges to draw from that the municipal court judge could just call upon, or staff could call upon, either way.
So, for example,
All right, so you're not going to ask for a council action at the time?
No, we wouldn't burden you with that.
Just to,
Approve the pool, yes,
okay,
correct,
that's what I wanted to do.
yes.
and you'll hear more about things in that.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah, yeah.
It's just a good feel-safe thing.
And then, did we want to talk about the financial advisor piece at all?
Well, we do have two, well, it's up to you. You could bring them up now and then they could be done, if you want to talk about it now.
That's what I was asking, is whether you'd like to get through that.
Well, the reason why we changed the agenda is because I wanted to just draw attention to the fact that we do sometimes have to pay staff overtime to attend the regular meeting if you're going to pull something from the consent. So what we're trying to do now is just, save a little time and money. So if you intend to pull something from the consent agenda, let us know in the work session so I can have the staff members stay.
All right, so I'm not hearing any intent to pull consent items, but I think there might be a couple of questions with regard to this, which we could do now or wait an hour and do it at the end of the week.
It's up to you. You can
Let's do it
certainly.
now, I don't think it's very deep. I don't
And then they can go.
Which one do you want to do first? You want to do let's do the judges.
The what?
The judges, judge pool,
Okay.
dead pool, judge pool.
We can't vote. Okay.
Keith, come on up.
We have more
Yeah.
information than just what we're.
Yeah, we're gonna get a presentation, right?
I don't really have a
No.
elaborate
No?
presentation,
Okay.
just to let you know, it's kind of basically about continuity of services. We hold court twice a month. So in the event that, our current existing appointed judge can't be there, we want to have a pool that we could call the from City of Tualatin, City of Vigo, any existing municipal court judges, what we're suggesting as the pool.
So the pool would be judges that are already functioning as municipal judges elsewhere,
Correct.
not somebody that's not functioning currently.
Correct. That's the word.
Okay?
Yeah, just to clarify, before we had Judge Winehouse, we used to have, when Judge Gleason was here, he had 2 courtrooms that he operated at the same time. He did one, and then he had a couple of pro tem judges that he would alternate with. And because Judge Winehouse is elected to do it all as the sole
Himself, yeah,
judge
yeah.
and only have 1 courtroom, we really have no backup anymore. So this would give us a backup for whether the judge got sick or went on vacation. So that's the whole point.
Counselor West?
Is this a common solution we see, that other cities our size and that, it sounds like we have one judge, but to be able to kind of have?
It definitely is a common to have a pro tem judge. Sometimes the pool is listed as explicit individuals. Our courts, you know, we're only running twice a month, so it's very much a random kind of thing. So I haven't really seen it written as we have written it to be such a huge pool, but I think it's to our benefit to do that. That way, you know, because it's such a random event, we want to be able to call on a larger pool to have success. Otherwise, we have to cancel court, basically.
So
on a
maybe a
court
little bit
night.
of context helps, like, we used to have a backup or a pro tem judge, right?
Yeah,
And so the benefit of doing it this way is that we're not locked into any one, just, you know, if someone is out sick or on vacation, we have a whole pool of judges that we can draw from that are doing the similar work in other cities, so, and plus, if you have a pro tem, most times those folks are out looking and hustling for other jobs for full-time, so you could have a lot of turnover in that. It's just better to have, and how many times have we not had our judge?
yeah, Judge
Zero.
Winehouse is 0. He's been
Right.
here for the past 2 years, but the odds are happening he's going to want to have a vacation or sick leave. He's also the judge now in the city of Woodburn, so he's booked up a lot more.
We've used up all of our good graces. We're about due for him to take some
Possibly.
time.
Right.
I don't know, he's a workhorse.
But he's
Yeah.
new. Counselor Ackerval.
So for this list of like substitute people, would we need to have a contract then outlining this relationship or the description of what would be expected of them and what they expect of us for each individual person that's on the list? Or, how does that work?
I wouldn't imagine, I mean, it's traffic violations. In terms of, we'd probably treat them as an independent contractor because it'd be so random that we would need them. So I wouldn't imagine we would need a contract.
No, you know, we may have a form that they sign in with, but we have a contract with our judge, but we wouldn't with the pro tem.
Okay, but there'd be something that would articulate.
Right.
Yeah, they would.
Services, hourly
they would
rate,
know
that
what-
kind of thing.
Like that
They would
kind of
know
stuff.
what they're supposed to do and what they're getting
Okay.
paid, yeah.
Kind of a per diem thing.
Well, it'd be an hourly rate.
Hourly rate, with 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours.
Okay, we good?
That makes sense.
All right, thank you. Let's then talk about the financial services, if we could do that. Good evening.
Good evening. So tonight, we have our professional service agreement with PFM Financial Advisors. Unfortunately, our contract lapsed. It was terminated in November of 2018. So this is just kind of picking up that. We typically budget about $50,000 a year. These are, random projects. Right now, we have, we're looking to do some refinancing of our urban renewal for the east side, and so we need to do some kind of analysis because we have prepayment penalties to see what the viability is. So that kind of, a little higher level financial advice.
But also just remind the council, we have on some occasions in the past been able to reanalyze and essentially refinance like you might do on your house and save very significant amount of money by putting the money into doing the analysis and figuring out where the sweet spot might be. And so there's an upside to being on top of that
Yeah.
also.
Yeah. With our water and sewer bonds, we have refinanced both of them
Yeah.
for some significance.
Questions? Councilor Ackerval.
I had asked you earlier this week about how this might have differed from the previous contract, and I understand that maybe like the types of work that would be done is more defined
More
in
defined, yes.
this contract, and it seems like a good idea to have everything just more defined. So, and I was curious about the amount too, because we're capping it at 50,000.
Yeah.
And so that's a clearer definition than maybe we've had in the past. And the 50,000, is that we haven't ever run up against 50,000? Is that about average? Have we historically been a long ways off from 50? Just to kind of get a feel of where we are, if you can help me remember that.
That's a pretty solid number for us.
Okay.
I don't remember us ever going that high.
Uh-huh.
We do have a lot of financings coming up, as we have seen with our water and the sewer and all these different things. So it may be that we want to do a more, thorough analysis of when you do it and how much you get and all of that. And if it's something like that were to come up, then I would have to come back and ask for a
Okay.
bump in the contract.
Okay. So, but the 50,000 isn't really a long ways off from where we have been.
No, it should be, it's more than adequate to make
Okay.
sure.
Thank you.
Counselor West?
So just understanding, is that 50,000 like a flat fee? Or is it say this is the umbrella services we offer and you have a cap of, but if you only use 30, you only pay 30? Is that correct?
As time and materials.
Time and material. And then, so is it almost like a retainer type of thing? And then we encompass, and for 50,000, we can do up to all of this, and we reassess if it needs to be 70 or if it needs to be 60. Is that
Right, if something else came up, then we would have
Okay.
to.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's just time and materials for each individual's assignment as it comes along, so it's.
Okay.
And they're different rates for the manager versus,
Right.
the analyst versus.
But they only do the work that we ask them to do.
Correct.
Right.
Right,
Yeah,
specific
it's-
scope.
Right.
Yeah, it's by individual projects.
So just out of curiosity, is this the same firm that we've used previously? Did
It
we
is
put it
the
out for
same-
bids, or did we, how did we do
It is the same
this?
firm. We did talk to two different companies. The reason why we only did two is that we had a list of the number of contracts they had, and the two had like 170 between the two of them, and the other two had 9. Or it was very, very, yeah, it was a huge, one was through the special districts. I didn't really think that would, I didn't know if they would do us, and then they had only done a very small numbers. The other company is Piper Jaffray, and we would probably use them if we went to a big bond sale, because they have, that's where their niche is they have those kind of contacts. So if we went out to a public sale, it would be probably something we would use them for.
So the wording that's in here says we will not send this kind of work to anybody else.
Right.
So how does that leave us open to be able to use Piper in the scenario that you
That's
have
because,
outlined
yeah.
under this contractual language?
And one of the reasons why we have the more detailed information is that this is new SEC regulations, that they really have tried to make these separate things. So we can do that for the large bond sales, and they would have to, so it's pretty well laid out in the SEC things. We have that option.
Okay, anything else? We good?
Thank
All
you
right,
very much.
thanks very much. Okay, so we do
Thank you.
that. Let's jump in then to our bigger stuff, starting with Basalt Creek then, if we could.
Oh, Mayor, did you want
Yes.
to do counselor concerns?
I guess we do want to do that. I'm sorry, we didn't, we kind of lumped that together. Any counselor concerns? Counselor West?
I do. I think we talked about it earlier this week. I talked to Brian. I am incredibly concerned about legislation happening in Salem that I think will dramatically impact Wilsonville negatively. And so, and this piece of legislation is flying through. But Senate Bill 608 is the rent control bill coming down the pike with very little debate, very little public input. It is just flying through the legislature, and I think it will have a dramatic impact on the region. And it's not the type of legislation or housing policy that, it may work in Portland, but I don't think it works well here in Wilsonville. So I'd like to discuss that. I ultimately like to see the city take a resolution in opposition to it. But I think as a council, because it will impact one of the biggest things that we deal with, which is housing cost and development in a very impactful way, I think it's important that we discuss it and we try to advocate and do what's best for our citizens here in Wilsonville.
So I read in the paper today that 608 passed out of
The
committee
Senate.
and to the floor, is that right?
It's in the House now, yeah.
It's actually through the House. It's up for a vote. Yeah, it went through yesterday.
Okay.
6-3 vote. So I think our
It
lobbyists.
made it through the committee.
Committee, right,
Yeah,
right, so it's on the
but
floor, yeah.
But there are no more
Would you like Mr. Leo to come up?
Yeah, probably wouldn't
He's
hurt.
actually at the legislature and
There's no more hearings scheduled on it,
it's up for a vote.
except for a vote.
Yeah, it's
So
up for a vote.
no more chance for public input.
For the record, Greg Leo, the Leo Company, Public Affairs Advisor. Yes, 608 has passed through the House Committee and is pending before the House floor. It had a hearing on February 18th. We did not take a position on it, nor have we testified on this bill. Had a work session on 220. It passed out pretty much on a straight party line vote. The Senate was, the vote on February 12th was 17 yes, 11 no, with Senator Johnson being the only Democrat who voted against it. So it's headed for the House floor. I'd just like to say I think this bill is going to pass the House. It came out or on a straight party line vote out of the House committee. So pending before the House.
So our ability to impact, persuade, do anything on this is pretty much nil unless we
I
want to
don't
send a
think we
letter.
can stop this bill, or if we did, I think we would not even be a road bump in its path forward.
So sending a letter, a resolution to the governor, probably not going to do anything.
The governor, the speculation is that the governor will sign the bill. No, I don't think it'll have any effect whatsoever, other than maybe hurting us in terms of goodwill with some of the members we're trying to work with, including the leadership.
All right, so there's more than one side to this. Remind the council that we have had Wilsonville citizens come testify in front of council. I remember instances of people saying they'd lived here for 10 years and their rents were going up 30, 40, 50% in one shot, and they weren't sure they would be able to live in Wilsonville, and what could we do to assist? That is representative of some of the challenges some of our citizens that we represent are having also. I think there are credible arguments both for and against this, and my viewpoint is that a letter from Wilsonville would not shed any additional factual light on the question in a way that would change the trajectory. The intensity of the debate primarily coming out of the Portland urban area has drawn testimony, as I understand it, from both proponents and opponents that have verbalized very thoroughly the arguments on all sides of it. So personally, I don't see an upside to Wilsonville stepping into it in terms of being able to change things, and I am conscious of more than one side of the question.
Has
Councilor
the league,
Leahy.
has the league taken a position?
Took no position.
League took no position on it. Metropolitan Mayors Consortium took no position on it.
They did have some concerns and questions and more on the implementation side.
I think it impacts, our voice matters because the majority that's trying to use a Portland policy to cram a solution down the entire state without appropriate debate, ramming it through the process, puts us and our citizens at risk. Senator Gerard, who's just south of us, tried to make reasonable amendments to try to work this bill to be better, and he was silenced and shut up in his hearings, and now it's flying. So the emergency clause that they have on it, which would stifle debate and make this an immediate thing that takes immediate impact without the debate happening. And then on top of that, it's not just the emergency clause, but the ability for local municipalities to say this policy doesn't quite work for us. We want to take a different approach. We know it works for our citizens. That type of amendment was not allowed to be heard, and a lot of grandstanding was done. So if we can't even have a say in what housing policies affect our citizens directly and the most, even if we're in the minority and it may pass through, in principle alone, we should say for people, Wilsonville, we're going to have this debate and we want what's best for all vulnerable populations, and rent control is not that. Price controls do not protect vulnerable populations. Arguably, they protect the wealthy, and we've seen from New York to LA and across the globe how these price controls are not the answer to affordable housing issues. And so that's why generally, I hear what you're saying, we may not be able to move the needle, but this piece of legislation that's a one-size-fits-all coming out of East Portland is not what's best for Wilsonville.
Okay, so we've heard your viewpoint on it. I need to hear viewpoints from the rest of council about whether you think we should enter into this debate or not. Councilor Ackerball.
I'm like, sorry. You know, I think hearing what, Mr. Leo, his last comment too, I think is sitting with me, about what effect would this have, except for perhaps working against some of the relationships that we want to have with, the group that is making these decisions. So I think that when we send letters, it needs to be done carefully and not rushed too. That's one of your critiques of what's going on, is that it's being too rushed. So I would say that I don't feel comfortable, putting together a letter tonight for something like this.
Councilor Lehan.
I don't have enough information about the particulars and details of this bill to have an opinion one way or the other. But I do think we have to pick our battles. And I think that's what Mr. Leo was saying, is there, which is why well ahead of the session, we have a legislative agenda or legislative priorities that we want to deal with. And there may be all kinds of other bills that we think are good or bad or whatever, but if they're not part of our legislative priorities, we don't want to do something that will get us crossways and threaten the things that are our legislative priorities, because we have to focus our limited ability in those areas. So I'm not highly motivated to do anything because of that, but mostly because I don't know enough about it to have an opinion, and by the time I did, it's probably too late. I mean, by the time I studied it enough to know what was going on.
So, Councilor West, I'm not hearing strong support from this council to move on this.
Certainly as an individual, anyone can
Anyone can, as
express
an individual, not as a representative of the
of
city.
the council, but you can say that you are a member, but you're only speaking for yourself.
Yeah.
And speak to, address it to whoever you want in the legislature, or the governor's office, or whatever. And certainly I've done that in the past. Items that were not germane, shall we say, to city business.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate it's moving so quickly. I feel for the rest of the council that they don't have as much knowledge on maybe this specific bill, so it's hard to take a vote on something like that. But as a council, if we hear rent control and then statewide and price controls, we should immediately be aware and on top of it. And we know that rent controls mean that investors are not going to have the capital or the incentive to keep up properties. We have a lot of people who rent in this community, and potentially we see nice properties become more derelict over time. The investors are going to be more interested in building homes for the wealthy who can pay the price. And it's very much a top-down Portland-driven agenda that is trying to impose itself on the rest of the state, the only state in the union for statewide rent control, on a failed policy that we have seen by widespread economics on both sides of the political aisle condemn openly, from Milton Friedman to Paul Krugman. So, I mean, we can sit back and be like, well, we can just get steamrolled by Salem because there's no way we can stop it, or we can try to use what little voice we have to say this really is not something just to ignore because it's going so fast. I wish that the council would be a little more open to maybe debating it. Maybe by our next council meeting, it's law and the governor's already signed it. Maybe that's the case. But I'm just really concerned about the long-term effect, especially a compounding already housing crisis that we face here. This is a supply and demand issue, not a rent control issue. So piling on bad policy after bad policy to try to fix this problem, this is not good.
Okay, I would assert that some of what you are indicating is factual, is opinion, not fact, and that we do not have documentation in front of us. So I would take exception to some of the statements you're making as proven and absolute. I don't see them that way. So there's a lot of varied opinions and experiences, and if this council is not ready to undertake to investigate and take a position on that, then that will have to be the answer. I mean, it's the will of the majority of the council is what we've got. So I don't know how, I mean, unless you want to make a motion at the formal meeting and see if it flies or if it dies, I mean, I guess you have the ability to do that.
I'm curious as to what statements that I've made that you don't believe are
I
factual.
don't want to have this discussion. We don't.
Well, where else do we have it, Mayor?
Well, you're the only one that wants to have it. So we don't have it because the majority of the council isn't prepared to have it.
Mayor, I think you've given Councilor West an alternative in the regular session.
If he wishes to make a motion.
Councilor Lehan gave an alternative to Councilor West that he could certainly advocate and send letters to everybody in the legislature and state that you are a Wilsonville City Councilor and this is your opinion, not the majority of the council. But beyond that, we have two more items that are going to take about an hour, so I would ask that we cut off debate on this and save it for another time.
I'd like to make a motion in the council meeting.
You can do that when we.
Okay.
Yeah, in the formal meeting, we don't do motions in work session. So. I guess the appropriate time to do that would probably be when we do individual
Council discussion.
councilor concerns. Okay, when we get to that point. All right, let's then go back to where I apologize, we had you up here before, Basalt Creek, if we could.
Thank you, Mayor Knapp, councilors. My name is Miranda Bateshell, Planning Director with the City of Wilsonville. And with me tonight is Kim Reibold, Associate Planner with the city, and Scott Manser from DKS. And we're here tonight to outline for you updates with the Basalt Creek Concept Plan implementation and upcoming actions that the City Council will be taking and discussions you'll be having over the next couple of months. As you know, the Basalt Creek Concept Plan has been a multi-year planning effort for this area that was brought into the urban growth boundary. And last year, in August of 2018, both cities adopted a concept plan. The updates to the city's comprehensive plan, including transportation system plan updates, is the local implementation action that we take to acknowledge the concept plan in our local policies, and it sets the stage for annexation and implementation in this planning area. Both cities need to adopt those comprehensive plan amendments by May 3rd of this year. And a required step in enabling Wilsonville's planning authority in this planning area is amending our urban planning area agreement that we have with Washington County. So all of these items, if we can get there, will be coming to your meetings over the next couple of months. First, you will see the urban planning area agreement as amended with Washington County at your next scheduled city council meeting. I believe it's on the consent agenda right now for March 4th. And Washington County will follow with adoption by ordinance on April 16th with the County Board of County Commissioners. And then following, we will bring to you City Council, bring to you the comprehensive plan and TSP amendments for City Council adoption. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on that and provided a recommendation to council on February 13th, and your public hearing is scheduled for April the 1st. I also just wanted to briefly mention that on your work session, your next work session, you will also have an informational item where the county will come and present to you information on a Basalt Creek Parkway extension study. And so we went ahead and coupled those for you so that you could get an update right away on that project. So with that, all of the information for these different items was actually in your packet. You have the urban planning area agreement that's been drafted with the county, and you have the amendments that are proposed for you. So the project team really is here tonight to give you an opportunity to discuss, and that we're available to answer any questions that you might have.
Is that your report at this point?
Yes, and we have,
Okay.
we do have information on some of the amendments and changes that we can pull up, but we thought we would leave it up to what kind of rose to the occasion that needed discussion, as a lot of it was probably straightforward.
Okay. So, council, if you can be thinking, if you have questions and things, I will start with one if we could. Under your proposed comprehensive plan amendments, attachment A, bullet 1, amendments to the comp plan to apply to industrial land use designations, Basalt Creek, Coffee Creek Industrial Area, consistent with anticipated Washington County and City of Wilsonville Urban Planning Agreement. Does that suggest that we don't really know what that UPAA revision will consist of?
Can you point me to the page number?
Page 204?
204 on the electronic packet.
Ooh,
Yeah. 5 of 167? What do you want?
Oh, 5, it's in the staff report.
It's in the staff report. Yeah.
Gotcha. That,
I don't.
at the time we have written this, we may not have had a final draft. The draft of the urban planning area agreement that was provided to you in your packet is the final draft that has been drafted with the county. So
Right,
that
so
you
we're
can
not-
expect.
We're not just forecasting what they might come up, I mean, we
No.
actually are at a point, we
Right.
have an
We have the
agreement of
draft.
what to put together.
Correct. And they
Okay.
will just adopt it after we resolve to execute it. So we need to go through the process of saying that we resolve to execute that, and then the county will actually go forth with an ordinance
Take action,
to take action.
yeah.
So I think the reason for that, just to clarify, is we go first and then the county goes. So you can never predict what another government body's going to do.
Right.
We fully expect that they will pass with their staff and our staff.
Yeah, staff has coordinated it,
Yes.
though, right?
But so we don't know for sure until they do what they do.
Right.
Okay. Council, questions?
Could you back that up one?
Yeah.
No, that's okay.
Was it the one before that, or?
No, no.
Okay.
I just wanted to double check on that.
Timeline.
What the timeline was.
Our next meeting is March 4th.
So I don't have any questions if you want
Yeah.
Specific questions?
I don't have any.
to ask.
Has the adoption process in our partner Tualatin proceeded in a timely and expected way, or do you have any information we should have?
Yeah, we've been in constant communication with our partners up in Tualatin. They are on a very similar timeline. I believe our adoption processes are about a week apart because they have meetings on the opposite week. They have Washington County coming to their March 11th meeting. They will be going to Planning Commission in March and be hearing their comprehensive plan amendments in April as well. And we did also work, it's probably important to note that we worked in partnership with the county and the two cities, looking both at the traffic findings and then also with the urban planning area agreement. So there are a number of statements in that document that essentially mimic each other in both cities' urban planning area agreements, since a lot of that work, concept planning work, was done together.
In the section on special areas of concern, which is what? it's either 3 of 7 or, no, it's 4 of 7 or 11 of 167 or,
Thank you.
under design objectives there at the bottom of 4 of 7, consider adoption of form-based code similar to Coffee Creek Industrial Area. What is the process and the trigger by which we would undertake to do that kind of a step?
So it would be a follow-on step to this adoption process. So right now, we go through the comprehensive plan process, get these policies adopted, and then it would be an implementation action that we would take. I see 2 probably from the land use planning side related to zoning, looking at the craft industrial and understanding whether our current industrial zoning really promotes and achieves what we were looking at for that, or whether we need to look at an additional zoning designation.
Okay.
And then the second would be to go through applying form-based code to the Basalt Creek planning area and what portions of that we would apply it to. And that would go through a process with the Planning Commission and City Council.
Okay. Transportation system update.
Sorry, before we move
Yeah,
on
yeah, go
from
ahead.
that, because I'd highlighted that
Councilor
section
Eckerval,
as well. It says similar to what is being used in Coffee Creek, so, but not necessarily the same. I mean, right, we have the menu of items, I'm remembering back that.
Right. We
Right?
have the different, so one of the key components of that form-based code is the framework plan that identified the different streets that are in the Coffee Creek area as the organizing principle for the code. And so we would have to go through a similar exercise in identifying, what that framework would be in in Basalt Creek.
Yeah.
And so I think this area is different in that there are different site conditions, and so wouldn't necessarily be just copying and pasting that code. I think we would want to think about what elements are appropriate to be used in Basalt Creek, what elements maybe are more Coffee Creek specific,
Okay.
so that we would be able to give that further consideration.
Okay, so it would really truly be like a kind of a standalone
Yeah,
process
exactly.
and project and stuff. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? On the transportation plan, then, you have a variety of different components. It starts out, this is page, 15 of 167? TSP, Transportation System Plan changes that we would need to make. It starts out with a section on the Basalt Creek Concept Plan. Is that whole section something that doesn't exist in the TSP yet?
Previously, there was just there wasn't a lot of detail about it. There was a discussion that said the Basalt Creek concept area to be determined.
Okay.
And so this is really providing clarity on a lot of those projects and what, and identifying those projects through this plan amendment.
Okay. Seems like, I'm dredging up old memories here about the multiple years of discussion about transportation in Basalt Creek and what the magnitude of trip generation was expected to be, what the total capacity of the transportation plan in that area was, provides for, and then what we are ending up with, and all around all that discussion was the question of if Tualatin puts more housing into this area, what happens? If we have more industrial and employment lands, what happens? So how have we come out ultimately on this whole thing? Are we doing any kind of monitoring of trip generation, or is our final position that the definition of land uses by acreage is the total definition of expected traffic capacity?
So we've had to land on the latter because we can't regulate each other's trip generation tracking or how we track in our traffic analysis on development applications. So what we've looked at is the breadth of the land uses that are in the concept plan and use that for trip generation. And it's worth noting that it's not in front of you right now, but we do have findings, transportation planning rule findings, as well as an updated traffic analysis that was a part of the package that went in front of Planning Commission that I can send you. And that's noteworthy because the two cities worked with the county to essentially run one more traffic analysis to incorporate the 2018 adopted regional transportation plan. And so that essentially gave us an updated system forecast and system conditions, and we used that in order to run one more traffic analysis together. And that was important for ODOT to see as they see our comprehensive plan findings essentially coming together at the same time and being adopted along the same time frame, so that the area is seen as a whole and that it's not being seen as one and then the other. So I can share that information with the council.
Any noteworthy changes as a result of that final analysis?
The only change really was that one of the overpasses did get take off the financially constrained list. And so that was part of the reason why we reran it, but the network still maintains level of service.
So that implies one of the freeway overcrossings will not be in as near term?
Correct.
And is the other one, the north one, or the south one came off?
Both of them are outside of the planning horizon.
Past
Neither is
2035.
within,
Past 2035,
Correct.
yeah.
concern, if those are not on the financially constrained list, what basis, if any, do we have to put those routes on a map and protect those routes from encroaching development?
It's a great question. I mean, right now, what we've done in our mapping is shown them up to I-5 with an arrow, but we didn't go to the detail of showing specific paths of those.
Is there a way to work with, I assume that would impact both Clackamas and Washington County, right?
Correct.
Is there a way to work with your counterparts in both counties just to see if there's something from a policy standpoint we could, like an MOU or something?
So when we met with ODOT to walk through this initial, and I think it was with the county as well, actually it was the county meeting, not with ODOT, but the one thing they pointed out for a reason to show them in this manner that we have was that showing the actual route on the map opens us up to the goal exception process with the state,
that
and
makes sense.
that was
Okay.
not something that within the short time frame we have that we really
So
could
just,
consider
it's
pursuing.
problematic just showing it on the.
Correct.
Okay. But is there a way from a policy standpoint to work with our counterparts? And I'm just throwing that out there as an option.
Well, I know we've been in communication, this still is in their TSP as well, in the county's TSP. We have the same project list from the Basalt Creek Transportation Refinement Plan. They're just not on the financially constrained list. It is something that we continue to work with them, and when we had part of the discussion during the Regional Transportation Plan update, that it was a concern that it might not make it on that list, but no one had the funding for it at this time.
That makes
So,
sense. But they're in the rural reserves, correct? These lands would
Who?
be,
Not rural, I don't know.
I don't know, I'm asking. Urban reserves?
Urban reserve.
It's urban
Okay.
reserve, it's
Yeah.
urban reserve, yeah.
You mean on the
So we would
east
get
side?
notification if there's going to be any kind of development within
Right.
our urban planning areas, right?
Correct.
Yeah, but by that point, you've got a development with entitlements, don't you?
But there's also agreements on what can and can't get built, and there's zoning, county zoning, so if somebody did build in an area that we would future need to put a road or an overpass, we could maybe have conversations at that
Yes.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, we've had this problem before with 95th right away and this and that and the other that we didn't preserve, that,
It's a good point.
you know, the private sector does what it's going to do. They see a business opportunity and there's nothing apparent that would conflict. It's pretty hard for government to come along later and say, you know, oh, by the way, we wanted to put a road there, you know.
I think the good news is, though, is that the restrictions on the zoning in that area are going to prevent anything like major from getting put in there. They're not going to have to condemn a shopping center, is what I'm saying there.
No, but there are industrial employment buildings in that area, and we're hoping there's going to
Possibly.
be more, and if one's in the wrong place, then it,
Yeah, but you're not going to see any kind of urban level development in those areas, is what I'm suggesting.
And when you do, it'd be through a process with us on, at least on,
We would
in the
get
Basalt Creek
notification.
planning
Yeah,
area.
yeah.
And that's something where we could work with the developer in thinking about where those future roadways might go.
I think strategically, it makes sense for us to have some kind of conversation with Clackamas and Washington County, just to say, this is a concern of our council. Is there something we can do from a notification and policy standpoint to at least think through where these things might end up logically, and maybe have like a sensitivity to that as we go forward? And the reality is 2035 sounds like a long time from now, but it's really not, from a planning standpoint.
Well, I won't still be on council, so.
Never know. Never say never.
Yeah, okay. I was informed today, I don't know how to say this because it was not an official notification, that Washington County had been called by at least one Tualatin council member to come to a meeting to talk about whether there was any alternative to doing what is being formally proposed. And I don't know if we're privy to those conversations or how far those conversations might or might not have moved. I asked Chair Harrington about it this morning, and she kind of downplayed it as not being all that significant. I still find it interesting that if some council members in our partner city there are not prepared to support the agreement we've all agreed to support, where that's going.
Well, I don't know about innuendo. I can tell you that they voted affirmatively on the plan. So that's all we can ask for. We can't control.
Was that a strong vote? Do we know?
Hasn't Washington County weighed in also? Did they?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
They
And
sided
Metro.
with the city, so did Metro.
Yeah, yeah.
I think, in terms of the answer isn't going to change. You only get one bite at the apple.
I hope that's true. I mean, it took so much dental work to get that bite, Councilor West.
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to,
The sub area. Central
right,
sub area.
is it, they don't like that it's industrial, or
They wanted residential.
they want a residential? And
We
so
already-
there's still a fight around that, or is this settled?
There might be a skirmish, but the fight is over.
Okay.
That's how I would define it.
Other questions for staff? So you're going to be bringing multiple steps to us over the next near term.
Yes, so the urban planning area agreement as drafted and included in your packet is how it will be advanced to you at your next meeting. And it's currently on the consent agenda. And that will then move forward for adoption by the county. And then we will follow up with the comprehensive plan and TSP amendments to you, again, as presented in this packet.
But things like form-based code would come later.
Yes, that would be a separate initiative once the comprehensive plan and TSP amendments are adopted.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll have some experience by them about.
Well, with
how
Coffee Creek,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
form-based,
the hope.
Yeah.
In fact, I think we were working toward that on the design of the mental health building that went in out there, right?
yeah. The West Railroad property is classified or protected or considered in what way?
So
called a
it's
pond.
its own area of special concern. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, so it's identified as area of special concern N, and so on page 5 of 7 of attachment A, or 12 of 167 in the overall packet, we do have a paragraph addressing the West Railroad area. The fact that we recognize that there are a number of constraints in that area, and right now we're really not in a place to identify what the best lane uses might be, particularly as it relates to whatever infrastructure might be needed. So this paragraph notes that this future study will need to occur here once particularly we've seen some development in the Coffee Creek and Basalt Creek areas. As that infrastructure extends in that direction, we can have a more realistic idea of what makes sense. So it is identified in here as an area of special concern, but it is not mapped on the comprehensive plan map amendment as any use, since we have not identified a use.
So
And
there
for-
is no concept plan for West Railroad yet, then we're not defining really anything about it.
Correct. As you'll recall, the counselors who were involved during the concept plan adoption will recall that there was significant back and forth about the West Railroad area. There's significant natural resources and constraints in that area. Initial infrastructure analysis looked like it would be pretty costly to serve, and a lot of questions about what type of industrial land that would serve, that would really be able to be served in that area, or whether other uses, maybe even recreational, might be better suitable to that area. And as the process continued, a lot of the discussion around what would be appropriate in West Railroad did not continue, as we spent a lot of time working with Tualatin on essentially the areas that are to the east of that railroad, up in that kind of more northern and central portion of the Basalt Creek planning area. So that didn't get very well defined in the concept plan, and we feel like it's worth taking more time to look at, and we weren't really able to do that during the concept planning process.
I think about half of it's underwater, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's Coffee Lake. That's why it's kind of shaped like a lake.
Which could be an asset,
Exactly.
correctly
Could
handled.
be.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a big development.
We thought it was
potential.
best to undertake that planning for that once we had finished the process with the city of Tualatin, had an opportunity to adopt this, and had time to actually think about it and talk about it amongst ourselves.
So people that are active out there have told me, just as an anecdote, that they have watched bald eagles snatching ducks off of that lake right here in Wilsonville. Right here in Wilsonville, yeah.
And the circle of life in Wilsonville.
It could be pretty cool, yeah. All right, I'm not hearing any other questions, but now's the time if you've got some. Otherwise, we'll see this back. It's kind of disappointing to have it on consent after all these years of work, to just.
You could pull it.
It'll be a public hearing in April,
We're here to
so you'll have your
Public hearing in
chance back.
April,
Yes.
all right.
You
Maybe we can wait
might
till-
take the opportunity to congratulate Ms. Batesville on her promotion
Oh, yes.
as our new planning director.
Correct.
Yes. So I assume that she's.
She loves that I did that.
She's enthused about working in Wilsonville.
She
so.
loves
That
it.
is very true.
Yes.
Thank you very much. for the
Congratulations.
Thank you for all the work that you all have done. Obviously,
Thank you.
Basalt Creek has been a huge, huge
This is
project.
a big deal, to get this far and be this successful, with a number of hurdles,
Yeah.
legal and otherwise.
Well, we've got to push forward and try to achieve the vision, but we've got a framework to do it on, and I think that serves us well, so thank you all that have worked on that.
Thank you.
And I guess that leads us to then the water and sewer systems development charges.
Just water.
How come it says sewer on here?
Because I copied over from the last
It's
one.
just water, though. I want to assure you that we're only tackling
I
one
was
tonight.
hoping you didn't read that, but no.
Mayor caught it.
He catches everything.
So let's not advertise it.
I know.
So where do we go? How do we get this started? So we just have a quick presentation here to get us back on topic. We've been here a couple times before. We did do I think, a more thorough staff report this last time around that I hope helped clear up some of the questions that had been coming up. So tonight, we're looking at the Water System Development Charge. It's also known as the SDC. Just as a recap, the water SDC equation includes three types of fees. We have a reimbursement fee, which is based on capacity of existing facilities. We have an improvement fee, which is based on projects that have been approved through various master plans and other building plans. And then we have a compliance fee, which the Oregon law allows us to collect for the accounting of SDCs and for the study and things of that sort. And so all of this put together is about $9,600 for what is being presented this evening. The last time we had a SDC study, the charge was about $6,000. So why the big difference? What's going on? So the first thing we can look at are the different study areas. You can see in the year 2000 study, it was very different than the year 2019 study area. Now in this particular plan, or study, we're including the urban renewal reserves, Frog Pond, the full build out at Villa Bois, several of the things that just weren't included in the last study. The project list was different, of course. At that time, in the year 2000, the big project was getting the water treatment plant, well, it's a different way of spelling plant, just getting it constructed. They had a new Reservoir B, and looking back at the records, it looks like that was the Ellingson Reservoir that was being constructed. And then there are a bunch of different water lines. Looking at the projects for this year, or for this study, we have 2 expansion projects to the existing treatment facility. We have the West Side Level B Reservoir, and then several projects to build different water lines. But the prices have changed. One was $39 million, and today's is $66.6 million. And this is just the SDC eligible portion of the projects. So when we have put together the presentation, there was a request to have some different alternatives that could be looked at by council. The first one is to, of course, we can retain the current rate. We wouldn't need to do anything. That's $5,995 per meter equivalent. In total, we need about $113.5 million to complete all of the projects that we have on the list. And it's divided into different buckets. Right now, we have $4.6 million in the existing fund balance, and you'll see that that's across all of the different alternatives. So that's our first funding source. And then we have what we would be collecting based on the SDC rate. So if we went with the full rate, we have about 67 million we would be collecting. If we went with the current rate, it would be about 42 million. So that leaves about a $25 million difference that somehow or another we would have to come up with a funding strategy for that. Our second one was a discounted rate. That was at $7,800. That's the median between the current rate and the full rate. That one would, we would leave us about $12.6 million of having to come up with some kind of funding strategy. We have a phased-in rate where year one we have 7,100, year two would be about 8,400, and then ramping up to the full 9,600 in year three. And with that, we'd have about a $1.3 million. And this, of course, is over the time of project. So this, this is just looking at it today. It could, change. It could go up, could go down. And then, of course, if we go with the full rate, which is being recommended, there would be no, we're covering everything that we are planning on doing. We wouldn't have to have any additional city resources to cover the project. So when we look at the schedule, this is for all the different meter sizes, starting with a $9,600 with the residential and then increasing based on the flow factor. And that's all we have for the presentation, and the rest of the time we will take questions and help everybody understand.
Okay, Councilor Lehan.
Yes, on our previous thing, it demonstrated the impacts of the 3 or 4 different methods maybe you could go back to that slide. Yeah, that one. The impacts on ratepayers versus SDCs, or which, how that shifted? Is that, is
That's
that
what that's
other
what this
city
is,
revenues?
yes.
That's what that is.
Someone, I think, made a suggestion that it might be more useful if we put in dollar amounts, just to show what it looked like with dollar amounts in there. Because
The other one was
basically,
a
the bottom
sliding
line
scale.
is, on all four of those options, except for the far right, is that's the amount that you would be subsidizing growth or developers.
Right, right. But, so then my other question is, does that, the list of projects that we had on there, could you back up to the list of projects? That's not the whole cost of all projects we're ever doing. These are SDC eligible.
Correct,
So
yes.
there are other projects which would go to, which would bear on ratepayers.
Correct, and
Yes.
that's in that previous slide. It shows the total project CIP for both rate and for SDC, right?
Correct. That's this here. So of these $113 million in projects, this is what the ratepayer,
The ratepayers
ratepayer, and
are
some of it
covering
can
that.
be,
Okay.
like the city of Sherwood is required to pay a third for some of the projects.
Yes, okay,
So that would be included in this one.
okay. So, so what the ratepayers are paying is in that other city revenues.
Correct.
It's not all,
Correct.
not 100% of that, but it is in there. And the other one is, yeah, okay. Yeah, then I'm comfortable with that.
Counselor West?
So in our option there, under the other city revenues, Wilsonville residents, to some extent, will participate in the costs for these developments in the future. Am I understanding that right? It's not just SDCs, it's also,
Yeah, so that,
41 million.
if you look 66, 54, 42, 41, that's all rate. That's residences
Okay.
and businesses existing
that are participating in it also right now.
in the full CIP.
Yep.
Yes.
Just mulling this over the last 2 weeks or so, or just over than that, I'm curious if this is an option. Do some cities, because I'm so concerned about affordable housing, it's what we are always, it always comes down to that, it seems like, and this is just some additional cost and expense. Do some cities, maybe like a per faucet, so the bigger and more grandiose your home or property is, the higher SDC you paid versus somebody that's living in a more modest home or maybe a starter home or buying their first home, the SDCs are less for that type of property. Is there a way to do a kind of a progressive or sliding scale with SDCs? And does anybody else do anything like that?
I would leave that up to, I'm not aware of any in Oregon, but that doesn't mean that they're not out there. Maybe our SDC expert can roll up to the mic.
I knew I'd get to do this. Doug Gabbard with FCS Group, one meeting away from a set of steak knives, I think.
Yes?
For water, I think it's slightly less frequent that is done than probably for sewer. For sewer, you have things like fixture units being
Okay.
used as a basis, and that really goes to the scale of the house. We have seen some types of SDCs based upon the square footage of a house. The problem with that is you have to then create a correlation between square footage and demand, yeah. That's hard to have the data to do that. So with meter capacity equivalents, it's safe, it's standard, but it doesn't exactly do what you want it to do. And those are the kind of the trade-offs. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I probably use this, the three people that live in our home, we use the same amount of water as we did when we moved from a smaller home. But we also have a bigger yard, and there, we probably have a little bit more demand now that we have moved up. I just wonder if it could be just more equitable. And if that's a way that it can be a little bit more equitable and really understand the need for those people that are in that buying that first home, you are right in every penny. You're budgeting it out. You're like, oh my God, I'm gonna have a mortgage. And if you're buying your $1 million home, you're like, well, the SDCs are what they are, right? It's a little bit different of a priority for people and maybe trying to be sensitive to that other population.
One distinction that I think can be helpful is that SDCs don't try to do the same thing as water rates. So water rates charged for the water that you use.
Okay.
SDCs are more about the capacity that's available to you. So an SDC, make sure we have the infrastructure in place so that everyone in the house can flush the toilet at the same time and someone can use the sink.
It also covers fire flow as well. So it's-
Absolutely it does.
That's an important
Okay.
aspect that's often overlooked.
It's good to know. And then I have one other question. So this is a 20-year projection that we're, right, for the SDC, they look at a 20-year picture, we talked about,
We're looking at capacity.
that we would have potentially from now to 20 years for development, is that
We're
right?
looking at capacity to the land that we have to serve.
Okay,
Even if it takes longer than 20 years to
Yes.
build it out.
Okay.
So don't get fixated on the number of years. Fixate on what we have to have ready when that stuff builds out.
right.
So the numbers that I saw when I met with staff, get me right here, were that our build-out is expected to be, at this point, based on our land, somewhere around 52,000, essentially doubling the size of the city.
And I think our history suggests that we'll probably get there
Yeah.
sooner than
So
some communities
it's not
will.
20 years, it might be 20, it might be
Okay.
longer, but that's the magnitude is the size, yeah.
And I'm just trying to get the scope. So the 3-year, because I asked that, because the 3-year plan to phase in is kind of taking the 3 years to kind of phase in from when the point of projection out. Is that correct? Is that why it's 3 years to phase in on that third option?
The phase-in is an alternative that you could choose if you were swayed by the argument that it's going to have a major impact on home builders putting shovels in the ground.
But we'll still have to spend the money.
We still have to spend the money. We still have to get everything ready, all the capacity, so.
Have to pay the freight on it.
I know I sound like a broken record on
I hear you.
this, because I am.
Yeah.
It's a zero-sum game. It really is your ratepayers, or you're going to have growth pay for itself. I know it doesn't make me popular in some circles when I say that, but it really is what it is.
The variable is whether advanced technologies can yield less water use per person, per household as we move through the next couple of decades, and we don't really know.
Well, but I think that's more of a rate issue than it is a capacity issue.
Well, except we won't need the same capacity if everybody's using less, but.
Well, if I was Kreskin, I could probably help design that SDC, but I'm not. We have to go on existing data.
That's what I said, you don't really know.
We don't know.
That is the variable, is whether it will be different in the future in terms of.
Possible.
And it's possible, but you're also right, it's more likely to impact rates or, water usage and be made up in the rates.
And I will say, we try to, haven't always in this city, in the history, but we try to make sure that our master plans are up to date. Every 5 to 7 years is about the best practice, right? This hasn't happened in this case for a variety of different reasons. We also try to, make sure that we're putting an escalator on there for, construction cost index, and that hasn't happened in the past. We are doing that now. So there's a lot of reasons why this has kind of not been elevated at the kind of level it should have been.
So that argument suggests that everybody that has developed in the last 10 or 15 years has actually gotten a break on their
Yeah.
SDC
That was my
compared
next
to what
question,
it
yeah.
would have been if we had updated and calculated and done these things on a more regular basis.
Correct. And so what I was saying to get to Councilor Lehan and your point is if that turns out to be true, that new technology and everything is going to make for less demand and we don't have to expand the system like we think we are going to, we can make that adjustment at the next time we update our master plan. So that could mean a reduction. It could mean that we don't have to increase by as much as we thought we did. So that's all things that we can
Yeah,
consider
you
down the road.
you can adjust it in
Right.
the future.
As you get closer to that future and it becomes clearer.
But you're also likely to squeeze it. People are not going to drink less water in the future than they do now.
If it's $1 a glass, you mean?
It takes so much fluid to keep this body running. It's 78% water, so there's some biology here.
Yeah.
But at some point, we will have squeezed almost everything we can squeeze out of appliances. So there are two places where you don't know, we might reduce usage. One is yards, is outdoor watering is the giant one, and we're making improvements on that all the time. And the other is fixtures, low-flow fixtures, whether it's your washing machines or toilets or whatever. But at some point, we will have squeezed just about everything we can out of the fixtures.
Can you
And,
pull up the meter size cost?
So as time goes on, what I'm saying is, when we first set off on this, when everyone had 7-gallon of flush toilets, there was a lot that could be done to reduce water flow. But pretty soon, toilets are all going to be 1.2 or 1.6 or something, and you can't really go too much lower.
So can you explain the 5/8 to 3/4, 3/4 to 3/4?
Unless they're all composting.
So those are two different meter sizes. One has 5/8 at one end and 3/4 diameter at the other end, and the other is 3/4 at both ends.
And that's for,
That's the water meter.
right, why would
Why
you
does it
typically
do-
go 5/8 to 3/4, 3/4 to 3/4?
5/8 by 3/4, which is the smaller, lower capacity one, has been in the past historically the standard water meter used for a single-family residence.
With or without irrigation?
It's really a matter of age.
Okay.
It's really the older housing stock has that, and more modern housing stock is more of the 3/4.
So we're basically
By
saying
3/4.
that, you're basically saying any new home that's gonna be built is gonna be on that second line.
I don't know that. I don't know that to be true, but we
So
increasingly
if
see
somebody
that.
was looking for a way to save money, what do you typically need? What meter size do you need to serve your house and also to do irrigation?
I'm gonna have to opt out of that question.
Okay, that's where I was trying to get to. If somebody was looking to save money,
How big's your lot?
I don't know, I'm gonna.
But that's
ask-
part of the answer to your question.
Yeah,
Now,
it's the lot size.
in Villebois, where we required the fire sprinkler systems, they do have the larger, the 3/4 by 3/4, or is it the 1 inch?
I'm not sure, but they
Yeah.
get reimbursed.
They get
for it.
reimbursed.
They get
for that,
reimbursed,
yeah.
but I mean, that is one example of using the bigger one because of the fire flow.
So if somebody
or
was
the
looking for a way to
sprinkler
save
system.
money on their SDC, Zach, under this scenario, is there a way they could do it? Or is it all based on lot size?
I mean, most single-family residents are going to be the smallest meter size. the
5/8 to
5/8.
3/4.
Yeah, unless you have a very large house with a very large yard, is the only time that
So
you
the
would
Street
bump
of
up.
Dreams homes,
If they need a 3/4.
they probably will.
I mean, that gets determined at the building department.
Okay.
Part of their review.
Okay. If I understand from your report, the account has $4.6 million in it, and there's $11.4 million in projects to do within the next 36 months.
That is correct.
So we've got to come up with a difference between 4.6 and 11.4 really soon, which calls out the question then, if we do a 3-year graduated implementation, do we end up with our $11.6 million, $11.4 million or not?
I think you're less likely. It's hard to predict. It depends on how much growth we're at and what type. I wouldn't think of it that way, though, Mayor. From a policy standpoint, you really need to look at this as rates versus SDCs. I'd really like the council to focus on that question, because that is the question.
And I would throw in a piece in regards to this, having been here when the enormous community battles over building the water treatment plant, which we did just by the skin of our teeth on the vote, but convinced the citizens to vote for it, and had huge amounts of support from, of course, developers, because we were in a full-on moratorium. You couldn't build anything here. And so, of course, developers were in favor of it, and eventually the citizens came around to that also. But part of what we said to them at the time was that was the advantage for us to do this at the time when we were looking at the possibility, which never could have happened, but nonetheless, of going to Bull Run or the Willamette River, was we would have control over our water rates and our water future, and our rates would be, our water billing rates would be, even though they were going to jump significantly when we built the plant, above what our neighbors were paying, they agreed to that on the basis of, but they would not rise at the level that the rest of the region's water rates were going to and have risen, certainly Bull Run. And so I feel like that's part of the promise that was made, was stabilizing those rates and not, so I'm always paying way more attention to the rates than I am to the SDCs. And the other argument about it is that you've already paid those SDCs, and so have you, and so did I when I moved that little house. $25,000 was what the city fees were to move that little house, and most of that was SDCs. So we've paid it, and it's only fair that development as it comes along pays for what they are getting, for what they're buying, and what they're buying is, what we've decided we need to buy. And if it turns out we don't need to buy quite that much because people quit washing their clothes or something, I don't know, then we'll back it off again. But I'm strongly on the side of the ratepayers and the previous SDC payers who paid the full price for the treatment plant at the time, and that was a huge jump when we did that in '01.
So don't hit the ratepayers with more to subsidize future
Right.
growth is where I hear that argument
Right,
going, is that
right.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want the ratepayers to pay nothing, because we always have to upgrade our infrastructure and add more, replace pumps and
Yeah,
do things like
repair
that,
and-
which all of us as current ratepayers need to pay a portion of that. But to carry the cost of new growth, we already carried that when we bought our houses, and we shouldn't have to carry it again. That's what I think about subsidizing. That's why I wanted to clarify that the ratepayers are paying the 41 million.
41
Yeah. That's for their share of improvements that are coming along. But if you went to that previous thing, they already paid the 25 million and the whatever millions to build the plant and do all those things. And my recollection was it was 40-some million. What is the 25 million, just as the SDC portion, I suppose?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the community paid 40-some million to build that plant.
Other questions? Counselor West?
The projections that we have up there on the previous slide, they're, how accurate have we found these models to be? And could it be potentially, I know in 5 years, you said we can reassess these things and you can make an assessment then, but isn't it a little difficult to totally understand what type of growth that we may have and then what the economy looks like over that long period of time? Or how do we know how accurate the models are? Do we see some variance in percentage generally on these models?
So here's what I'd say about the models. It doesn't matter. We either grow or we don't. If we grow, then people pay SDCs. If we don't collect SDCs. So we try to project based on history, what we've done in the past, and it's not perfect, but we have to pick something and go with it from a planning perspective. So models are models.
But are they, I mean, that's the evidence that we have to go off of, Brian. Do we generally see them pretty accurate over time, or do we see them vary 5%, or what do we usually see?
I would say that our projections have been in the ballpark. I mean, I think we grow a little faster than what our projections are, to be honest with you. But I don't have the statistical evidence to provide you to right now. Again, I would just focus on the fact that this is about capacity. If we grow, we collect. If we don't collect. So we know what the cost is going to be roughly because we've engineered it. So we understand from an engineering standpoint what it's going to cost. It really is, I hate to make it sound simple, but it's pretty simple. Even though it's complex, it's pretty simple in terms of the outcomes.
The front end is more expensive
Yes.
because we got to run some big trunk lines out to Frog Pond. So the back end of putting on the last 10 houses is going to be a lot less than hooking up the first 10 houses. If
Yeah.
you count, we got to run that giant trunk line. So to that extent, it's important that we're reasonably close to our
Right.
growth projections, because you are running out, you're kind of out on a limb in the beginning, like we were with Villebois. I mean, there was a huge amount of upfront infrastructure to get to those first houses.
So our projection for Frog Pond West is 750 houses, something like that. And those will likely see a lot of those built within the next 3 years.
And the application activity would suggest that that's probably correct.
And if that's true, we'll probably roll right on ahead into Frog Pond
East and
East
south.
very shortly thereafter. Well, so part of where I was going with that whole thing about having enough money for the next 3 years worth of projects, is, are we going to capture the SDCs from those 750 houses in a way that will put that money into those projects immediately, or are we going to not capture it, in which case we're going to have to come up with the money somewhere else, and it'll have more impact. But it seems likely at the rate we're going that Frog Pond West is going to build out pretty aggressively, barring a economic downturn of significant proportions in the immediate future. So this is on our business for tonight, Resolution 2724. It's a continued public hearing from last time, so we'll have people that want to have some input. I guess I would say a couple of things. I very much appreciate the extra work that staff put into providing this additional perspective. It helped me. Maybe it helped some of the rest of you. Maybe it helped some of the public understand what it's been. I think the fact that we've not done a major analysis since the year 2000 is a relevant factor to this. I would hope that we don't end up in that scenario again. I'd like to see our expectations that we would reanalyze in 5 years, that we would update, that we would see where we are, about whether we're on track or whether we're not on track, about whether we need to adjust, and how fast, what that appropriate time frame, 5 to 7 years, I think you say is standard. I sure hope that we can do that. I don't know if that would require some special wording in a motion to push that, or, it's in the staff report as a staff recommendation.
Well, I think it's just an administrative kind of thing that we just need to make sure that when we're moving forward through our CIPs, that all of our infrastructure master plans are current and relevant, and that does mean making sure that whoever's putting the CIP together is planning for that, because part of the SDCs, we do get to collect a little portion of that to make sure that our master plans are current. So it's just a standard best practice in local government to do that. We will make sure that we do it.
Okay. I had a representative from Home Builders talk to me this morning after JPAC meeting downtown. I sent a couple of questions into legal and to staff on that and got answers back. One of the questions asked seems to revolve around a misunderstanding or an uncertainty about when the SDC money is required to be paid. The Home Builders rep was indicating that he thought that we were requiring, well, it's not what I want to say, that if system development charges were modified after they had a project submitted, that they got hit with the additional charges, even though they came in. And staff is saying that's not accurate, just for council's perspective, that when the application comes in, that locks in the point at which SDCs are established by dollar amount, and then they're expected to pay them when they get their building permit, is the way that it's
It's a
done.
building permit application, when the building permit
Building,
application.
when the building permit is submitted, the fees are collected. That includes SDCs.
On submission, okay. The other was an idea that they had about whether some of the whether SDCs could be split, and the short-term projects, SDCs could be done now, and the longer term could be collected later in the cycle somehow. Staff has not been, what shall we say, enthusiastic about that approach.
I can give you a horror story on that from my previous city if you want to.
Complexity of all that, and those concerns revolve around the number of developers that we have lost mid-cycle or mid-project, and that certainly was true in Villebois in the downturn. And if we did not collect on the front end, we probably would not have collected at all on some of those. So those are more problematic. We may hear testimony tonight about those ideas. That wouldn't surprise me.
Also, maybe just a little bit of discussion about affordable housing, since that seems to be an issue and a topic of discussion.
Yeah.
None of the houses in Frog Pond West would be considered by anyone as affordable housing. So I think if you're looking at affordable housing, SDCs are absolutely a factor in that. But unless somebody can show me a magic pot of money that allows us to get shovel-ready land ready for home builders to build homes on, I don't know what the answers are in terms of SDCs. It's, again, I know I'm not sounding like Santa Claus here, but it really is. We have to collect those or we can't get the land ready for development.
So as has been our intent since we lost Mr. Gale, I think we need to do our housing investigation about whether there are ways we can facilitate more economical housing and what those would be. And if we're talking about subsidizing, there's different ways that might be done. In some cities, SDCs have been one of the ways. You know, you certainly have a debate about who's paying if the developer's not paying, but the appropriate time to have that discussion is when we're looking at the overall housing analysis, I think, not
Yes,
now.
agree.
And I guess the last thing I want to say is I was initially thinking that the 3-year phase-in might make a lot of sense. I personally have concerns about the amount of housing that will be built in the next 3 years in Frog Pond, and whether not collecting the full SDC from those $500,000 houses or whatever they're going to be is an appropriate answer. So I think that that's at least called into question by the dynamic of where we are and what's on the table now. I also have quite a bit of belief that the subsidy or discount has happened in the last 10 years, not in the next several years. I mean, really, people have been able to develop without having a full impact SDC over the last, I mean, you could argue we should have done this 10 years ago. I mean, so
Yes, that is correct. And a phase-in would create basically
Another
set of,
free-
well, it would create a subsidy for
A
sure, but
subsidy,
it would
right.
create a set of winners and losers, so.
Yeah.
If you build in the first year, you get this much subsidy. If you build in year 2, you get this, and then by year 3, it's gone.
Yeah, that's right. And it would impact those that are economically challenged in our community in terms of rates along the way. And so it's all of that. Anybody else have anything they'd like to ask or say? Or we'll get downstairs and have a hearing. All right, thank you very much.
Went in a lot quick.
So if that is everything for now, we'll call work session adjourned at 6:53. and meet downstairs.